year are you in school?
Graduating class of 2026.
Okay.
High school, right?
Yeah, high school, Norman North?
Norman High.
Norman High, okay. So you both are at Norman High and you're at Norman North, or you're at Newcastle, sorry. I got the ends in mind. Okay, are you good?
Yeah, I mean, I don't wanna say yes.
I mean, like you could, it's okay, you can brag, it's okay, are you good?
Yeah, we'll just say yes.
Okay, good. I figured,
So you could beat the host.
yeah, you definitely can beat me. If you can shoot better than 100, you can beat me, so there you go. All right, why are you here?
I am in a new position. I was a counselor for 15 years.
Okay.
And the community and school and our athletic director has a dream of working with our athletes and getting them better prepared for the futures.
Okay, so you're here to learn and soak it all in.
Give it all,
Perfect. Okay, Newcastle, why are you here?
I mean,
You're a senior, right?
yeah, so I've gone through the recruiting process.
Okay, where did you sign?
I'm signing a fit.
Do you know where you're gonna go?
Most likely Indiana.
Okay.
For football.
Okay. What position?
Defensive end.
Why NEL? We're not gonna give a trade secret. We're not tweeting this out, so don't worry.
No, you're good. I went and played in the Mid-American All-Star game down in Dallas.
Okay.
Met people there, reached out. And so that kind of helped my process with getting recruited, you know?
Yep.
Because I mean, other coaches, that
Yep.
really helped with that. And so I think it's a good tool to bring back to Newcastle because our recruiting process right now is not looking too hot.
Yeah, okay.
And also NIL.
Yeah.
That could keep it up.
Yeah, sure. Confusing is that's a great adjective for NIL right now.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for being here, coach. Appreciate it. All right, why are we here tonight? Got a sophomore in high school, right?
Sophomore high school.
At where?
Norman North.
Norman North, okay.
I want to be more on in the know.
Okay.
It kind of feel like sometimes parents are kind of on the backside. Kind of told, don't use NTSA, nobody looks at that. Okay, so what do we do?
Right.
But there's never really an answer. There's never really a pathway for kids coming through high school, I don't think. Because this is my fourth son.
Yep.
And this is kind of a broken bridge there as far as parents. What do we do? What do we do to help our kids?
Sure. Yeah, good. Great answers, and I appreciate you guys letting me totally put you on the spot. Especially you going first. That's not the easiest thing to do, so thank you. Helps me. All of this is super helpful. Tonight we're gonna try to put the needle right through this interesting conversation. We've got a bunch of different stakeholders here, right? So we've heard from parents, we've got some students in the room, we've got some coaches, we've got some administrators here, we've got some college students that are in the house, and then I think we've got some experts here. And I can tell you this, I think you're gonna find that we're gonna cover a lot of different topics today. Candidly, these are my friends, but I would tell you, these are folks that would get invited to a conference where there would be 500 people in the room. Okay, you have some of the most knowledgeable people on this topic actually sitting in the room here, and I'm gonna let them kind of do their own bio here in just a little bit. Here's kind of tonight's agenda, and we'll kind of keep this free-flowing as best we can. I'm gonna try to set the stage for what is likely a conversation here that we're gonna have with our panelists. I'm gonna go about 15 or 20 minutes and try to discern what's happening in the market right now when it comes to both high school, college NIL, and recruiting, and kind of what that looks like. And I'm gonna cover it kind of at 20,000 feet, because there's a lot of details with that, right? That are happening day to day. It changes dramatically. And so I'm gonna do my best to kind of do a bit of a stage setter. You don't have to sit in the back room. This isn't like church. And I'm gonna do a little bit of a stage setting, and then we're gonna bring our panelists up on stage here and get a chance to meet them. And I'm gonna kind of lead a little bit of a workshop and a conversation with each of them. And then we're gonna leave some time at the end for Q&A, okay? And so that, as you guys think through your questions today, you absolutely can do that. Before we start, I'm gonna make one little quick commercial. We've had a great co-sponsor, my firm, the Bedford Agency. By the way, I'm Bryan Bedford, for those of you that are getting spammed by me. Thanks for, hi Ryan, hello sir, how are you? You don't have to sit on, this is not like church, don't sit on the back row. He's a pastor, I can say that.
Don't take an offering.
Yeah, don't take an offering. But for those, we do have a great sponsor. Gary Warren from Sweat is Free is here. He's got some information on the back. And then my group, both Recruit Route and Bedford Agency, I've got some stuff in the back. If you're a parent, you want me to contact you, if you've got questions, happy to do that. If you're a coach, happy to answer that. All that stuff is in the back. But before we start, I'm gonna say a quick little prayer and then we'll get started tonight. So thanks much. Jesus, thank you for being here. Thank you for letting everybody travel safely. Let us be impactful and make a difference tonight for kids and parents and coaches and athletic directors. In your name we pray, amen. All right, very cool. Thanks for being here. All right, we're gonna start with a little bit of stage setting today, just to get you guys kind of familiar with the topic of recruiting and NIL, kind of go through the basics. I'm gonna touch on a few things that are happening. For the Bixby crew, I'm going to cover this again in a couple weeks, but you'll get a little bit of a preview here in just a little bit. All right, so this place in the world of college recruiting and NIL is absolute chaos. If anybody is telling you otherwise, they are completely lying to you, okay? Because it's absolutely nuts. It changes daily, right, guys? Literally daily at this point. So it is healthy for you to be confused because I can tell you, I live this every day, and so do our experts here, and it changes dramatically. So don't feel bad. Okay, just welcome to the party because it is absolutely crazy and nuts. And so why is that? All right, well, there's a bunch of different groups that are impacting this, right? You've got labor unions, you've got state laws, you've got high school governance, you've got recruiting and conferences that are making decisions. You've heard the old adage, billable hours never loses. You've got lots of attorneys that are involved in this space right now. It is an absolute industry in transformation, okay? Now, it creates some really cool and amazing opportunities, but it is highly fractured, and as you can see by some of the bubbles, some of them overlap and some of them don't overlap, okay? And so that impacts both the college game, but it also has a massive ripple effect to the high school market as well, okay? So again, trying to weave the needle here between a bunch of different constituents that are in the room. It means different things. These topics mean different things to different people here, right? You guys are parents, he's a coach, right? So totally different like lines of thinking as you're kind of thinking through this. And this is about correct, right? These bubbles, some of them overlap and some of them don't overlap, right? And it's creating kind of some massive heartburn for a lot of different people. You also have that we have a new president, if you haven't heard of that in the last week or so. Anybody noticed that? Okay. And so it means we'll have a new, leadership from a House and Senate perspective, and that will have a pretty significant implication at the federal level, let alone at the state level. Haneen's at Baylor, she's dealing with local issues that are affecting Texas, because Texas is one of 11 states right now at the high school level that don't allow NIL. And so they're watching that at the high school level, and some of those laws affect what they can do in college as well, okay? So lots of different things, lots of different layers to the complexity of this, okay? All right, so you may have heard, and why this gets even more complicated is at the very highest level, and for those of you that are gonna try to play at the very, very highest level, we're entering kind of this new world where the 4 biggest conferences, and maybe a few other individuals, but let's just, so that we don't get too far out of track, the biggest of schools now will enter an opportunity to do revenue sharing, at least potentially, okay? Now, that hasn't been fully ratified, but all inklings are that the House settlement that will get ratified hopefully this spring will allow schools at that level to do revenue sharing, okay? And so why is that important? Well, it's not just revenue sharing, but it's the implications inside of that impact things like roster limits, which will impact how many kids go play a specific sport now in college. Now it's gonna change, some for the better, some for the worse, depending on the sport that you play. If you're in women's soccer, anybody in women's soccer here? Like, those limits are going way down. Like, it's tough in women's soccer, okay? That's the perfect example where the roster limits are, they're having to cut kids, or they're having to pull scholarships right now because they're anticipating however many kids that they had, the roster size probably went down by 6 or 7 girls per year. That's significant on that size of a roster, right? So revenue sharing, this age of revenue sharing in the house settlement has, what it ultimately will do is it'll create an even bigger divide than what we've seen today. So we've always known that like the Holy Grail is playing on ESPN on a Saturday at a big time Division I school. And let's say the North Texases and Tulsas are always trying to keep up. That gap is getting ready to get even wider than it already is today, okay? And I love those schools, okay? But that gap is getting ready to get wider. We're gonna talk a little bit more about that when we get to panels, okay? All right, but a lot of you guys are just wanting to, raise your hand if you're just trying to go play ball. My man's trying to go play at NIL, or parents are trying to, like, for you guys, you're just trying to figure out how to go to college. Like, you're not even really, NIL's great, but you just wanna find a home to go play at. Okay, a lot of your parents or a lot of your kids, and that's great. Like, that's a great, these are just a few snapshot schools, but that's a great goal. And we wanna talk to you about that process here tonight. I'm gonna spend a little bit of time here in just a minute. But, so, there's obviously a lot to balance here, right? We've got recruiting. Many of you guys have heard about the transfer portal. That's complete chaos right now and has big time implications on you guys that are going through the recruiting process. And the portal impacts the high school coaches that are in the room. You're talking to coach about kids that are in the portal. All winter you've had to do it, right? So he's having to do like extra bonus duty, talking about kids that are maybe have transferred or planning to transfer, okay? Then you've got high school and college NIL, and there are some fundamental differences, and we're gonna spend probably quite a bit of time talking about the differences in those two worlds. And then you've got collectives, and we're starting to see collectives obviously permeate through college. They're on virtually every campus at the Division I level. There's in a bunch of Division II schools now have collectives, and we've even seen some high schools or communities around the school that are thinking or doing that today across the country, okay? So, and we'll talk a little bit about that and describe that here in just a minute. All right, so for those of you that are you're here to talk about recruiting, let's go through it. There are 6 levels of college football. Some of you guys don't play football, so you would just take FBS and FCS and just combine them, okay? And apologies, the gremlins on the display, apologies for that. But you can kind of get a sense of, at the Division I level, you got about, this is just football, it's just an example, but you can extract this for your different sports. This slide would get really busy if we did it for lots of other sports, but let's just use football as an example. 10,000 at the, let's say the 9 big conferences that are in Division I, then you have about 15,000 that are in FCS, which is like your Abilene Christians and your Central Arkansas, those kind of guys. And you got Division II, that's your Southwesterns here in Oklahoma, that's your Northeasterns, that's your Southern Naz, Oklahoma Baptist, Northwestern Oklahoma, those folks. Then you got NAI here in Oklahoma. You have 2 NAI programs. Welcome guys, come on in. You got Langston and Panhandle State as an example. But you got schools, a bunch of NAI schools in Kansas, and there's a few in Arkansas as well. And then you got junior college, and we have 1 junior college in Oklahoma, NEO, shout out, Norseman. I have 1 credit from the Norseman, so I guess I'm a alum. And went to Boise State and got 1 credit. That was a winner. I needed all 121 credits to graduate, and that was the one, so there you go. But it gives you an idea of, like, there's different levels, and it's about fit. I would tell you that as a parent. Don't get enamored by the glam and glitz of trying to go play at the highest level. If you can, that's awesome. I will tell you, just for those of you that, just to give you an idea of a data point, traditionally, the state of Oklahoma in football would have about 40 boys that would play FCS or FBS across the full state of Oklahoma. That's about the average if you go back the last 10 or so years. Feel free to spot check me if you want, but it's plus or minus about 40. That number's probably down on about 25% now because of the portal. Because they can go get kids that are a little bit older, a little bit more mature, a little more hair on their chest, and they can play them a little bit quicker than having to develop so quickly, okay? So there's a real natural progression of what's happening. And so you can apply the same logic to golf, and you can apply the same logic to basketball, and all of those other sports, are impacted by that, okay? Now, this gives you this is a sobering chart of the sport you play and then the percentage. So 1% to 7%. This is actually about 10 years old. And I would tell you these numbers are not even correct now. They're actually worse. So if it says 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% of whatever sport that you play, take a percentage point off of that now. That's how the market looks now because of from high school to college because of the pool. Okay, so it's getting more difficult there. So I don't know if we have any women's hockey, that seems to be the most or fencing. If we have any fencing and hockey women in the room, you've got the best odds here, okay? But it just gives you kind of an idea of what's the percentage look like. Generally, you'll see on social media, they'll say it's less than 7%. It's kind of the going number, but I'd actually tell you it's much less than that. And then you divide that up into different 6 levels in football or 5 levels in the other sports to get kind of the percentage of what it actually looks like. All right, so this is a bit of an eye chart here, but I would encourage you guys, especially if you're starting early. So we've got a parent with a sophomore, parent of a 8th grade. Is that 8th grade? Okay, good. What grade are you in? Junior, senior, junior, sophomore, junior. Okay, so the roster size, they're creating caps on the roster sizes now. Okay, that didn't really used to exist. Okay, so and this is for the biggest, the high level Division I sports. Now they've created roster caps. Okay, the other thing that it did is that now rosters, even at the Division I level, I don't think they'll do this, but they don't have to be a full ride. They could actually they're all what's called an equivalency sport now. So it means that they could give a kid, again, this would likely not happen, but let's just play it out here. There's a kid at Oklahoma, or a kid that Oklahoma wants, they technically could put him on a half a scholarship or a quarter of a scholarship, okay? Used to, you couldn't do that, it had to be full scholarship or not, okay? So some of those rules have changed. It's just good to kind of understand that, but depending on your sport, it's leveled out a little bit, okay? Some for the good, some for the bad, okay? Now, the basics of recruiting are this, and again, I promise I'm gonna wrap up here shortly. You gotta be a good person, you gotta be a good player, you gotta have good grades, you gotta be a really good communicator. That's what I try to help teach is be a really good communicator. Mom and dad don't need to order your chicken McNuggets. You know, you have to take initiative, you have to learn how to communicate with adults. That's challenging for some kids, okay? Technology, social media, all of that is part of it now. Coaches will tell you they just think of Twitter as just a recruiting app nowadays. And then you gotta be really good on the field. You gotta have good measurables, and you gotta be a really good player to separate yourself. So it's like a Rubik's Cube. I mean, candidly, you need to have all of that, okay, to do that. Now, you don't need to over-rotate. You don't need to think about specialization, any of that stuff. Just you focus on kind of having a plan of action in each of those areas. You're gonna have an opportunity. Now, it may not be at the highest level, and that's okay. I was a small college athlete. I cherish those memories, okay? I still have a group text with all of my college teammates. That's just a bunch of 10 dudes that are knuckleheads now because we're almost 50. But I love those guys, right? And so that's the opportunity that kids have, and there's nothing wrong with that. All right, the portal. People have talked about the portal. It's just an opportunity now that people can go to from one school to the other school with basically a mulligan, okay? Why is that important? Well, it's important because used to you had to sit, most of you guys that are old enough, you had to sit a year, or you had to have some sort of hardship. This is college now. We have Rule 8 now in high school. I'm not even going down that whole thing. Happy to talk to coaches after the fact on the link rule. I know all about all that, but in college, you basically have a one-time mulligan, okay? And that's kind of what they've done in high school too. But that has created basically unlimited free agency. So unfortunately, it's kind of the wild, wild west, because what's happening is, even though the kids may be not talking from school A to school B, most of the kids playing at the highest level, they all have agents. And their agents can do whatever they want. There's no governance. There's no collective bargaining. There's no agent union. I'd love to fix that one. I mean, so we'd make a lot of money if we could fix agent involvement happening right now, okay? All right, and then NIL. All right, we're gonna spend quite a bit of time talking through this one. College is a lot different than, high school, okay? So, in college, it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, you have, you know, let's just call a spade, you have pay to play, even though we're not supposed to call it pay to play, it's really pay to play. And then you have what most people would call real NIL, an endorsement, a brand deal, things like that. Those two worlds totally exist in the college market, okay? Most schools will allow you to use their logo, some will not. A logo or a mark or something like that. You've also signed an agreement to be able to use that in a proper manner, and you can talk a little bit about that. They're required to conduct a disclosure. So again, colleges have a compliance office. So they have like a rules desk, trying to simplify it for everybody, where they have to basically say, Bryan is a wealthy banker in town and he's gonna give $10,000 to me, and I'm gonna do this many appearances and this many signings and this many things, thank you, Ryan. And then I have to disclose that to the institution / NCAA, and you'll see rules changing around how disclosures happen in the college market with the House settlement. That's gonna change as well, okay? Collectives are part of it. Basically, it's a third party kind of acting on behalf or in partnership with the university to handle the transaction of cash, but also to handle the deliverables. So if they need to be in the community, or they need to go out and do an appearance, or they've got some sort of activation, or they've got to be on TV or the radio, that collective manages all of that, right? And that's Haneen's day job. That's what she does all day long, and you'll hear from her in just a minute. We talked about Rashwan. In high school, you have 39 states that have allowed NIL that are happening. So the vast majority of them, most states do not allow the students to use logos. That's not completely the case, but certainly in Oklahoma, for you guys, no logo usage, no brand usage. Can't do a commercial in the gym or on the football field or any of that stuff here in Oklahoma. It varies state to state. In Texas, as an example, NIL in high school is not even allowed, so it's the biggest state left that hasn't opened up the spigot fully. Disclosures, I would say in some states like Georgia are mandated. I would tell you, we're actively discussing that here in Oklahoma at the state level on making sure that we have a disclosure strategy at the state level. That's not a done deal, but I would tell you, I'm meeting with David Jackson on Thursday, so I can tell you it's a pretty active conversation on how to handle disclosures, meaning just so that we know what's happening and we have a better visibility to it. It eliminates all the people on social media talking about the bag man moving in or moving kids in. This allows us to kind of get a visibility to it, especially with the amount of agents that are involved right now with student athletes. And then there are some collectives, very, very few. I'm actually not a big fan, but I'll table that for a different day in high school. So let's get into today's conversation. So I'm gonna welcome my guests up on stage, and we'll get started here. And I'm gonna try to facilitate a little bit of a conversation. Tom, why don't you come right here, Randy next to him, Haneen, and then Gary. Hopefully that opener helps you guys get a little sense of today's conversation, and yeah, come on in. All right, so we've got an awesome group of people, and I want you guys just to help introduce yourself, a little bit of your background, kind of why you're here. Randy, other than Gary and myself, they flew in or drove in today, so it'd be good for you guys to get a chance to kind of get them. So, Tom, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, I'll start with why I'm here. You told me to come up here and see.
There you go.
My name is Tom Burnett. I'm a longtime Division I Conference Commissioner of the Southland Conference, which was primarily Texas and Louisiana schools. For a couple of years, we had ORU in our league, school in Arkansas as well. So this part of the country, but I did that job for 19 years. I also chaired the NCAA men's basketball committee that oversees March Madness and the Final Four. Did a lot of great things, fun things as a commissioner. Only job I ever wanted, except when I did it for the 19th year, I decided I wanted to walk away and maybe try to do something else for the rest of my career. Wasn't sure what that was. Got into the consulting business. I have out of Frisco, Texas, a group called Southwest Sports Partners, and really try to help schools with various projects, currently working on a couple of facility projects. Have helped people with hiring staff, help new presidents kind of understand what they should be expecting out of their athletic programs, that type of thing. So utilizing some of my background, 19 years as a commissioner, another 13 or so working in conference offices. An offshoot of all that was this side hustle called Lonestar NIL that we put together a couple of years ago that really developed out of questions I was always getting about NIL. It was brand new. What are you doing with it? What do you know about it? And honestly, I didn't know a lot about it at all. And I didn't know what I would do with it if I could do something. So what we developed was kind of an independent program that would be different than you'll meet Haneen here and the work she does at Baylor with their collective and their NIL operation. Ours is a little bit independent. And because we don't have high school NIL in Texas, I kept running into, and still do, in fact, talked to a parent on the drive up today from Dallas, that, you know, they're just not informed about NIL. Now, if you go to a Baylor or a UT or an OU here, OSU here, you're gonna know about NIL. But if you go to Stephen F. Austin, or you go to Oral Roberts or somewhere else, you may not have that benefit. So we've been able to try to dabble a little bit in the transactional space early on with the group. And in fact, a couple of Baylor student athletes worked with us, a golfer and a football player last year. And it was a great thing for us. We've kind of transitioned more into the educational side, kind of what Bryan's doing here with this presentation. Randy, who you'll meet, some of the work that his group does as well. So we found some success and traction in the educational space. So I don't know if I've eaten up all our time, but
We're done, all right.
Okay. But that's about me, thanks.
I mean, very fair, I mean, you chaired the NCAA basketball tournament, so how many years did you chair that?
I chaired it one, served on 5.
Okay, yeah, it's kind of a big deal. All right, Randy, go for it. Yeah, both of you, all of you all.
My name is Randy Eccker. I've known Bryan a long time.
20 years.
Since he left administration at TCU to come work in the sports market. So I played college basketball and baseball. Very fortunate. Went to Creighton University, full ride scholarship. Had a great career. Went right into coaching. So I coached for a long time. And after coaching, I left coaching to get into really broadcasting, which sucked me into the technology side of sports, which I've been in for the last 37 years. I worked with over 30 companies, primarily sports related, not all, but primarily sports related. Some I founded and managed and, you know, built and exited, and some I've consulted with, some I've advised, some I've invested in, sat on the board. Currently we have 5 companies that we own and operate in the sports space. I won't bore you with all the details. The reason I'm here is 2 of the companies are really focused on NIL. Eccker Sports was started, I was an investor in Open Doors, which is the largest marketplace in the country, right? Largest NIL marketplace in the country. They have about 250,000 student athletes that are in this marketplace and over 10,000 corporate businesses. And when I was talking to the CEO, I said, I think this is great. I love what you're doing. Obviously, I invested. But what about the high school kids? Right? And this is when only 3 states had high school NIL permissions. What about the high school kids? He goes, well, we really don't have time to do anything with them. And you know, we're focused on college. We're focused on making money. I said, well, this reminds me of when I was coaching. And the NCAA passed the Prop 48 rules and legislation that, you know, you had to have a 2.0 grade point average. You had to, it was tied to your ACT and SAT scores and all those things, a big formula. And it was confusing to everybody. It was confusing to us as college coaches, let alone the kids and the counselors and the families. And I see NIL as being very similar. I speak on this a lot. We work very closely with Texas High School Coaches Association and the UIL. Bryan's our partner here in Oklahoma. Bryan and my team and I work together to redefine the bylaws that have allowed for NIL now. So Bryan's right in the middle of all that up in Oklahoma and probably the foremost expert on recruiting and NIL-related issues, which you could tell in the state of Oklahoma at any level. So you guys are very fortunate to have somebody like that here. But so what we did is you know, you get to a point in your career, you really want to help people, right? And especially kids. We want to help kids. We want to help their families. So we started Eccker Sports, which is an NIL education company. And that company, we created a curriculum. We've got 4 different courses. We've got one for administrators, one for coaches, one for kids, and one for their families. We have the largest library of NIL-related content in the entire country. Just go online, Eccker Sports, go to the resource hub, and it's amazing, all of the content we have. We have every state law, we have every state bylaw, we have almost every policy and procedure. So it's really a potpourri and a very comprehensive library of information on NIL, which is great. But what that did for us, it put us right at the forefront of NIL when all of the state high school athletic associations started. They were either afraid of being sued, or they were afraid of having the legislatures tell them that they had to do NIL and passing laws that required them to do it in ways that they weren't comfortable, or they didn't think were in the best interest of their organization for the kids. And so in the last 3 years, we've gone from 3 to 40 states that have approved NIL. That's a ton. And you know what Bryan said about it's the wild, wild west, it really is the wild, wild west. I spoke to the board of the Texas High School Coaches Association in December. I said, the only thing that's certain about NIL is that there's nothing that's certain about it. Right? I mean, it is changing, as Bryan said, and everybody will attest, it changes daily. And you have to stay on top of it. That's why it's great for you guys to have somebody like Bryan here, or the rest of the people who have experience in this that are on the panel, because we're here to help. Right? You've got a lot of agents out there and people like that are out there to make a buck on this. A lot of businesses that are out there trying to generate revenue, and they may be helping kids, they may not be helping kids, but right now, the people who are here are more into the education, they're more into helping everybody to understand it so they can have a better experience with it. The thing that is most important to me here is that I'm doing some advisory work for a company called the NIL Clubs. And it's the parent company's joke, but the NIL Clubs they're the anti-collectives, right? The collectives are developed by the booster clubs or the alumni, really, and they run it and they raise the money and they funnel the money down into the kids. And it has become, at the college level, it's become pay for play, right? The NIL clubs are not. The NIL clubs are started by the kids. It is the truest form of NIL that I've ever seen. If you're not Ronnie James or Liv Dunn or somebody like that. So anyway, we'll talk about that more as we go. I don't want to take up all the time here. But really excited to be here. Love being here to help people, the kids, the families, the administrators, the coaches, anything that we can do to be helpful in that regard, that's what we're here to do.
Haneen, welcome.
So I'm Haneen. I'm currently the director of NIL for Baylor. Have been in that role since May. One of the oldest in these NIL roles previous to that was at Oklahoma State, serving as their assistant director of NIL there before I made the move to Baylor the past few months. Have been in the space since 2021. It was legalized in July, got thrown into this in August, not willingly. It was for my love of Oklahoma State. But since then have been probably one of the few whose background is not from sports administration, marketing, fundraising. My background wasn't any of that. It was really just boots on the ground, figuring out how to do this without a textbook, any information whatsoever to go off of, just trying to figure out what this space is gonna look like. And truthfully, when I was approached about this in 2021, I said this wasn't gonna last a year. And here I sit almost 4 years later, still on the institution level, and it sure as hell still exists. Seen so many different changes. I think to this point, changes every single week, and I'm lucky I've sat in a chair who's seen all the changes before even collectives, which we'll talk about was even a thing. So have really seen all sorts of different what we call forms of NIL, transaction, real NIL, but have built what an NIL program looks at an institution. Most of your Power Fours now are gonna talk about it. Not all of them have actual NIL departments. It's the newest department to an athletic department. Some are staffed with 1 people, some are staffed with 2, and some are staffed with quite a lot. Just every school is gonna be different. So I've sat in this space from, again, 2021, visualizing how this looks at the institutional level, from education to fundraising to working with third parties, working with the agents that we call in this space, all kinds of people under the sun, all kinds of working with student athletes. At Baylor, I oversee 530 student athletes across 15 different programs, from football to baseball to golf. Every single one falls under my job, and I work with them on a day-to-day basis. You'll probably see me looking at my phone. They blow up my phone all the time. My job is not a 9 to 5 typical job. It is truly a 25/8 job. But yeah, one of the oldest people in this space. I've consulted a lot of different schools. Likely I've talked to some school about something, whether on their collective, their fundraising, their internal efforts. I've written a textbook before that was even a thing in this space. So again, very blessed to be in the position that I'm in. One of the few who really know kind of the space and know the industry at the institutional level, but have seen a lot. And I think the biggest thing is, again, my experience. I love educating all of the younger generations, just because of everything I've seen in this space. So it's a really big thing for me, even down to when we recruit student athletes. They still all have my phone. They still text me whether or not they committed to Oklahoma State or committed to Baylor. They still have my phone, and they reach out and lean on me, because again, very unregulated space, still nowhere near close to being regulated. I think we're a few years away from that, but continuously changing. So I was just like saying, I like just being a resource. I've been in this seat for a long time, and I'm blessed too, so might as well just pour into everybody as much as I can. So I'm not gonna bore you guys with much of the details, but
She's so busy, she needs 2 phones.
yes. One's a work phone, one's a personal, because I had to, when I made the move to Baylor, that was one of the things I added in my contract, was a separate phone.
There you go. Awesome. Gary?
All right, mine's gonna be pretty simple. I don't have the extravagant biography, but my name is Gary Warren. I am the local representative, I guess now, with the grassroots. I'm literally here in Moore. I own Sweat is Free Transformation Center. We specialize in working with high-level athletes or active agers. We have a program that is the only one in the state currently. We're trying to change that. We have twofold goals with the program. We're trying to grow it locally, but we want to install it everywhere in the state, anywhere from Class A all the way to the pros, as in the Thunder. And how I got involved in this was I kind of stumbled into NIL sponsorship. I currently sponsor 7 high school athletes, make that 6. One has now gone to the next level, and so now we have 1 college. So where I got started was having a lot of questions, because I read the guidelines, and the guidelines kind of made sense to me, but then when you look at them in detail, it literally started with me going to OSAA saying, hey, can I film my athlete on the football field? And I didn't get any answers, and that's how it led me to talk to Bryan, because I just didn't want to do the wrong thing. And so I want to be a trendsetter. I'm not going to lie. I want to be a trendsetter. I want people to know our brand name, in addition to being upright, doing NIL right in the state of Oklahoma. And so if I've got to crack some eggs to do it and be, the person that fumbles the rock, so to speak, then I'll do that. But I want to do it correctly. And I really got fired up about it. That's why I wanted to have something like this, because if I don't know it, I know there's going to be a lot of people who do not know this information as well. And last thing I want them to do is to do the wrong thing as well. And so, making a long story short, I have a background a little bit in NIL, or more specifically intellectual property. I helped with forming a nonprofit organization that dealt with finance, marketing, and management for fitness entrepreneurs, how to get started in business in that regard. And so that experience has brought me back into this fold. And now we teach some of those basics to our sponsored athletes, and now we're going to open it up to whoever wants to in a video format. So that's me.
All right, so I appreciate, because this is really Gary's idea. He called me and texted me or tweeted at me or whatever in like November. Was like, we have to do an event, and I was like, all right, we'll do one, after the new year, we'll do one kind of around National Signing Day. I think that'll be fun. And then the rest of the folks really just reached out and said, I'd love to be part of it, so that's really cool, I appreciate you guys being here. I didn't really do my bio, but I've been in this space for 27 years, I coached at 3 different teams, I was a recruiting director at TCU, I started the football program from scratch in 1999, Southern Nazarene here. I've been in the tech space, my day job is I run about a $4 billion business at Cisco Systems, their sports entertainment, retail and hospitality practice, and then for the last 8 years, I've helped with student athletes, mom and dads that are trying to go through the recruiting process. I'm the agency of record here in the state of Oklahoma for NIL rules and policy and college recruiting. And then we work with schools as well to help their coaches and make sure they understand the rules and can do other things around recruiting and other things to help them. But that's a little bit about me, and I'm based here in South Oklahoma City. Gary and I are both Westmore grads. He's older than me, so I'll leave it at that. All right, well,
Brian, can I say one more?
Yeah,
thing?
absolutely.
Real quick. Please, remember your questions. You should have questions. Every one of you in here should have a question or a bunch of questions, and we're gonna be here as long as you want us to be. So we need you guys to get your questions answered, and whether it's any of us or Bryan, and Bryan's gonna be here a lot longer than all of us, obviously, but you should have questions because it's very confusing, it changes all the time, and not just questions on what's going on today, but where to find the right answers as things evolve.
As long as you understand, we get confused too, so we're at the forefront, maybe Haneen doesn't.
Yeah, so I'm gonna try to kind of go back and forth between recruiting and NIL, because we've got different parents that are interested in different topics here a little bit, and so, you know, we'll kind of go back and forth with that. Let's start on the, you know, recruiting side. And Haneen, I'm gonna start with you, just because obviously ladies first, we've got to start there. You know, I spent a little bit of time kind of just talking about the fundamentals of recruiting, right? Gotta be a good player, gotta have good grades, gotta have good, you know, like, I know you're not in the, per se, recruiting department of any of those specific sports, but, you know, as you look at it and kind of the couple schools you've been at and kind of looking at the world of recruiting now, any words of wisdom on how that's evolving, how the impact of some of the other decisions are impacting, like what words of wisdom would you give to a parent right now as they're just thinking about purely recruiting and little Johnny or little Susie wants to try to play their sport in college? Like, how does that, we'll start with you and then I'll maybe go to Randy next, but your thoughts?
I think recruiting has kind of changed the past few years because of what's happening at the collegiate level. Obviously, it's harder now to get to the collegiate level, and vice versa. At the collegiate level, I think it's a conversation we're having, how harder it's going to be to go pro, as if it wasn't even hard enough because of what's happening at the collegiate level. I would say advice, just understand your rights and understand what you should be asking on a visit. Not everybody has your best intentions at heart. So if you're going to be recruited at the Power 4, with Russia, you're going to have a contract with the actual institution. Make sure you know all those details. Make sure you know any contract that's put in front of you, regardless of where you're going to end up. There's some type of contract that's going to be put in front of you. So really understanding what's in that contract and making sure you know what your rights are and making sure you understand those details.
Let's pause for just a second there. So she's alluding to one of the changes that are happening. So how many of you played college sports maybe back in the day at any level? So a few of you guys have done this, all right. So when you signed, you had that special day where mom brought the cupcakes and the balloons, right? Everybody remembers that? My favorite day, the balloons and the cupcakes. All right, so you signed a national letter of intent, okay? And basically you signed your life away, and you couldn't transfer, you couldn't do all that stuff. That is no more, that is no more, okay? So now, what Haneen's talking about is one of the things that you do is you sign an agreement with Baylor. And you really sign, correct me if I'm wrong, you really sign 2 agreements. You sign a financial aid agreement for your scholarship. Basically, it costs, let's say, $60,000 to go to school at Baylor. It's probably more than that, but whatever, I'm in the ballpark, okay? You sign a financial aid agreement with the school now, and then you're gonna sign an NIL contract with the university or with the collective, or a little bit of both, depends on how they write it, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so that's probably like for any of you that are over 40, like you were used to that model where you signed like a national letter of intent. Now it's, what you're signing is really just directly with the school. Just wanted to clarify that right out of the gate. So, go ahead, Randy.
If I could.
Yep, please.
The NIL, NLI is not going away.
Yep.
You're still gonna sign the national letter of intent, and you've always signed a financial aid agreement.
Yep.
But the new financial aid agreement is gonna be much more expansive.
Correct. That's maybe a better way to say it.
And to your point, I'm not sure if you were throwing it to me or not, but, to your point, you know, especially if you're going up, if you're going to, you know, one of the schools, NAIA junior college, something like that, you know, your financial aid agreement would probably be pretty similar to what it's always been, right? You're gonna get a partial scholarship or maybe a full ride if you're lucky. But it doesn't mean NIL is not available to you, right? NIL is going to be available to you no matter where you go, right? Any college you go to, you can do NIL, right? It's just, what are you getting paid for? If you go to Nebraska or Oklahoma or Texas or one of those, you're going to get put into the revenue sharing, assuming it gets passed. You're gonna get put into the revenue sharing, right? Really in any sport, right? It's just percentages that are gonna change. You can correct me if, you know, I corrected Bryan. So, and to Bryan's point, you know, that's why it's so important to understand what NIL really is. NIL is just name, image, and likeness. You get paid for the value that you bring to some consumer, right? This has been going on long before sports, right? Particularly in the age of digital media, right? Social networking and things like that. I'll tell you, one of the first things Bryan and I got involved with here in Oklahoma, within 2 weeks after they passed the bylaw, we actually did an interpretation of the bylaws that allowed for NIL. But within 2 weeks, we had an AD call the OSAA about, you know, is it okay if there's a kid who's playing football at XYZ high school and he's posting on YouTube he's singing and dancing, he's in his uniform in the locker room after a game, is that legal? And Bryan and I were kind of chuckling about it, and so he called the coach and said, "Coach, what's going on?" And he said, "Well, yeah, he does his stuff, but you know, he's really not that good of a player. He's a backup wide receiver, right? Some games he doesn't even play. He really wants to be the next Garth Brooks. When he graduates, he's gonna move to Nashville, right? But yeah, and quite frankly, he makes more money than I do posting videos on YouTube, right? He gets $10,000 every time he posts, because he's got 1.2 million followers. So that's NIL. When I'm creating value to somebody else, for someone else, and they see the value and they're willing to pay me for that. That's why Bronny James and Liv Dunn and people like that are making millions of dollars, not because, I mean, Bronny James wasn't even that good of a player. Liv Dunn is not the best gymnast on her team, right? She's making $2 to $3 million a year because of her social media presence. There's a lot of influencers out there that are making 6 figures on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or things like that. All of you have, or all of your kids have the ability to do that.
Right. I'm gonna trying to give everybody here an opportunity. So, Gary, you've seen it at the grassroots level here. You've seen kids that they don't even know, they may or may not be on social media, they may not know how to do branding. What are the questions, or kind of what's the attitude of the kids that you started to, like, why those kids, and then what's attracted you to them as a business owner? Like, what are you doing to empower them? Kind of speak to those 2 or 3 concepts.
Okay, well, some of them was their titles, starting quarterback, for instance, wide receiver, those that have a lot of attention. So if I knew they had attention, they could go and put a post on social media and it would draw attention to the business. And it succeeded to a large degree, but we were very selective in who we wanted to go after. We went after 11, we got 7. And with the ones that we have, for instance, can I mention names? I just can't mention the school? Okay, just wanna make sure.
Do whatever here.
Oh, okay,
You're not
okay.
putting any burn, yeah, just start with names, that's fine.
Oh, okay, okay. Devon Scott, #1 recruit in Oklahoma, he plays for Douglas. Get a post from him, we get a lot of basketball players starting to contact us, hey, how can we get involved with you? That is what got our attention, more than anything. And Marcus James, who was with Carl Albert, he's now at OU. I get one post from him, now I got football players from Midwest City, hey, how can we get involved with you? That's what we really look for, is like, what kind of athletes, A, have a good attitude, because I've had several that contacted me and it's like, just bluntly, I want an NIL deal. Okay, I'm Gary, how are you? They didn't even tell me a name, nothing, it's just like, they assumed that I knew who they were. And it's like, well, I did this and this. Okay, you have no posts, you have no followers. How do I know, why do I need to invest in you? And they can't answer that. So what I look for is, are they gonna bring me revenue? At the end of the day, are they gonna do they have a chance to bring revenue to the business? Because it is a business. And so if the answer is no, I can politely say, okay, thank you for contacting us, but here's some things that you can adjust, and if you'll come back to us maybe in a year, since you're just a sophomore, then let's see if we can do something. Other than that, if their attitude is real bad, I just say, no thanks. But for the main thing is, who can help the business? And that's what every person that's looking for an NIL deal needs to be able to answer for that service or business, anything. That's the #1 reason. That's the #1 thing they need to answer. This is what I can do for you. Basically, look at it the other way as a consumer. What's in it for me? If you can answer that for that particular company or service, you've got a chance.
Tom, I'm gonna come to you next year. So you've obviously been in the college space a long time. You're working, you've got, your hands in a bunch of different things. What are, might help to go double click into like why you started Lonestar NIL and kind of the opportunity there, but just what are you hearing in the market just around, roster changing, sizes changing, what are administrators saying around the impact of college athletics? And then kind of maybe touch on those two things, both what you did with Lonestar NIL, just to give maybe people a little bit more depth, and then let's touch on the impact that's happening, or we think that's gonna happen in college as far as roster sizes.
Sure, again, Lonestar NIL developed out of not necessarily my desire to be involved in the space. I was kind of reluctant to that. Again, it came from questions I got. What was I doing? What do I know about this? My son or daughter is going to maybe a mid-level or a small school. What are our opportunities? We're not hearing anything from the high school. We're not hearing anything from others in the space. And in Texas, it's a little bit different, as Randy knows and Haneen knows very well, that because we don't have high school NIL, I question the priority, the time that the high school community is going to spend on it. Because to date, they just really haven't had to do that, unlike here in Oklahoma or the other 38 states that have it. I know there's some exceptions, and people doing great work in this space, but I think what we picked up on when we got involved is similar to what Gary was talking about. As an independent group, we were able to kind of be very selective in who we chose to work with. Student athletes that were already kind of maybe at Baylor, at Texas A&M, at Texas Tech, or a smaller school. We actually did Division I, II, and III NIL deals in the beginning, and found that we had the opportunity, maybe unlike, I don't want to use Baylor in every example here, but say North Texas, in our neighborhood, they only can choose from their recruited and enrolled student athletes. Whereas I could, as an independent, could step back and say, hey, look at this great football player, Josh Cameron at Baylor. Walk on, got a great story, got a full scholarship. I learned a few other things about him. Or a Baylor golfer, Davis Ogard, you guys may be aware of Davis in the back, who my connection to him was great kid, obviously great golfer, up and coming, but I had a relationship with his parents in Frisco, and his dad was a key person behind the, bringing the PGA of America facility to Frisco, Texas. And, you know, so there were relationships. So I was able to be very selective in that space, as opposed to maybe on a campus, you've got to deal with what the coaches bring you. And to kind of touch on that, and Gary mentioned this as well, is that everybody wants an NIL deal. Everybody wants one.
You got any to hand out?
But not everybody wants to work for that NIL deal, and that's why you're not getting one. But just kidding. But that's what you learn, and I'm sure it's much more the case when you're dealing with a big collective and such. And that was something that we kind of picked up immediately on. It's always going to be there.
Yep.
You know, people are going to want it, but are they really going to work for it?
So talk about that, like,
Yeah.
you've got a kid, he's got, I mean, like, what's a brand that some of your kids have worked with before? You've got the.
Well, golf's a good example. You know, golf's a
Great, you got golf.
Yeah, we got golfers.
Go golf.
Golf is a great example because obviously the individual nature of it. Honestly, you come from, most golfers come from a background, some affluence. They're connected. Their parents might be connected as well in their communities. Golf is not the cheapest sport to get involved with, like maybe on a playground or something like that. But so there were connections built into golf that we could really kind of lean into. So I don't know if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, yeah, well, but not the sport, but
Yeah.
the brands that they are doing their NIL deals with. Give me some examples of those.
Yeah, well, some of that was, the initial program was just to promote our independent NIL because there was no other independent NIL statewide organization. So we had our young people promote us as opposed to going out and pay an agency to promote us or advertise for us. We got the young people do that. And then we kind of picked and chose some things. Again, we were starting to pick up some of these student athletes were very engaged, wanted to fulfill every obligation, and others maybe got about half of them done, maybe 3/4 of them done. So some student athletes got other opportunities that maybe others did not. And again, we've kind of transitioned away a bit from that transaction space for now and into the educational opportunity, which everybody needs. You know, I heard parents earlier talking about, you know, no one's telling us anything. And that's where we have found, I think, a better opportunity for us, probably a more scalable opportunity, honestly, than being in the transaction space as a small independent shop.
Let's do a little poll. How many of you are familiar, or has anybody in here done an NIL deal today? Anybody know anybody that's done an NIL deal? Okay, good, yes, okay, cool. Does anybody want to disclose what it is, or I mean, you don't have to give the details of the person, but like, was it a brand, was it apparel, was it an energy drink, was it an appearance? Yes.
I work with Gary at Sweats Fruit.
Okay, what's he make you do? What's your deliverable? You gotta post on social media?
Yeah, I like repost, things, so tag me, I'll repost them.
Okay.
and stuff.
Is he a good boss?
Yeah, Gary's great.
Okay, good. All right, cool. What do you got, Coach? You're on the tip of your seat there. What have you seen?
Bat.
Oh, a bat, yep, bat company, yep, absolutely, yep, lots of trade, seen lots of bats and gloves and stuff like that. It's pretty common right now, especially in this market. Seen a lot of that, people do a trade for that.
You know, I would just add to that. I think the really high level, productive, you know, success stories in NIL are the student athletes. They aren't necessarily waiting completely on the collective to do everything for them. And that was something we looked at too. I don't mind telling you, we spied on Open Doors last summer before we got involved in this, and looked to see who was already working in the NIL space, whether it was their school collective or they were doing some things on their own, an apparel deal, a sneaker deal, a restaurant deal. And we could already pick up, obviously this person is interested in opportunities and they're working at it already. So we're not going to reinvent the wheel here. We're going to go and take advantage of someone that we learn they want to even do more, and they just had more opportunities, and that's where we tried to help them with some opportunities.
Haneen, do you have any examples of kids that before they got to Baylor were already doing NIL? And then how that's morphed or transformed since they got here? Can you describe maybe a story like that where they've done it in high school and they've been somewhat successful, and then they've obviously taken the college platform and taken it to another level?
Yeah, I've had a bunch, from a variety of different states, none in Texas. Well, I'm gonna take that back. I had one, who came in doing a few deals. He was an exception. Long story short, he was injured his last year, technically did not classify as a student athlete, so he signed probably what we think is the first, Texas NIL deal. Worked with a bunch who come in, again, to that point, I have a volleyball student athlete who's coming in with over 100,000 followers, who's worked with Proactive, a sneaker company, what is the collegiate, gown, who does those, I used to know off the top of my head.
Like Johnston?
Yes, Johnston, she did their collegiate their gown campaign, she's worked with Neutrogena, she's worked with some huge brands coming in.
She an agent?
No. Nope. So I actually got introduced to her a little bit before I got to Baylor, and started working with her before she even came on campus. So I saw all of her contracts, I saw all of her brand deals before she even got on campus. So she was one that I was very involved with early on. Getting back to the little previous point, from an institution standpoint, when I'm given a recruiting list, the first thing I go look at is the social media and go look at, okay, what they've done. So I have a good idea of who I'm talking to and what their comfort level is, and that helps me kind of, before they even get on campus to Baylor, once we know they're pretty well committed, start working with them kind of at the high school level to transition into college athletics, because to that point, there's some high school student athletes that come in and are gonna make more than your starters. I have a few football players that are gonna come in making more than QB1. So again, it all comes down at high school level, you're at a little bit more of an advantage coming in because you have more time to work on it because it's a brand new space than some of your older guys that are currently playing collegiately. I've had a wrestler that came in, 1 million followers. We knew he wasn't gonna wrestle for us, but we knew his social media presence and we knew the eyes that he could bring on Oklahoma State wrestling, and sure enough, there were women lined up at the door for that kid. So you guys might have seen him, but he came in with a bunch of brand deals. And so there's
And some baggage.
Yes, and some issues. And some issues, but there's so many that come in already having brand deals, depending on the state that they come from too. They have some coming in or they don't. I've talked with some student athletes who don't have any brand deals coming in, but there's some who have the opportunity coming into college that are perfect. To his point, I look at their social medias, I look at kind of, okay, how do you communicate? I can tell that all on your recruiting visit, I can tell that on your social media. So one thing to look at is your social media, because we now look at those a lot more closely than what we did 3-4 years ago. So even if they don't come in with brand deals, to your point, I can always evaluate and be like, okay, yeah, he's great, he loves fishing, he loves hunting, well, why don't we work, when you get here, we're gonna work on something along those lines. Or they're big on mental health, okay, well, we have these partnerships or these relationships built up that we can slot you into when you get here. So I worked with a mixture of both, but again, to their point, the space, what you see on social media is not the reality. I mean, my highest paid student athletes have not been football or basketball players. My highest paid actually was a women's track and field athlete. And I would say my 1 through 10 so far have been everything from acrobatics and tumbling, soccer, a mixture, but they work at it and they make more than some of your football starters and basketball starters.
Yeah, I think there's a trend here, that last phrase, working on it. Gary's, they've all kind of alluded to, like, and I would say that applies to both recruiting, just like, I wanna go play in college, and that applies to NIL. And candidly, those waters have gotten a little murky, that's why we're having this conversation. For the coaches that are in the room, you know, this is where the educational piece is important. You know, the piece of the puzzle that will allow programs, even parents, to kind of differentiate themselves is really building an educational platform that you can teach your kids. So one of the first things is being really smart and savvy on social media. I mean, we can not saying it's the be all end all, but when it comes to like your presence around recruiting and NIL, it's significant. I just met with one of the families that I work with the other night, and one of the tips I give to them is post once a week on something, primarily on Twitter, but like post something. And so he sent me a message, and he was like, we went to the PBR, and I took a selfie with my mom and dad and my girlfriend. Perfect. It didn't have to be about football. If this kid happens to be a football player in Tulsa, it didn't have to be about that. It's just, it's telling his story, his authentic self, so that we get a chance to know him. And why is that important? Well, so, you know, this kid will be a small college recruit, but it tells those coaches when they go down, and they will, they're gonna go through and look at all of his social media. They don't wanna see his huddle film every single time. I mean, trust me, they've watched that enough. They either know they're gonna recruit him or they're not, right? But can they have a conversation with him about some other topic, right? Can they talk about anything else to differentiate themselves? So I would say for the coaches in the room and for the parents in the room, like start with smart social, like create a class, create a curriculum, do a workshop one evening, do multiple workshops on what to do, how to produce content, how to produce video. Hire Gary, he's dang good at it. I'm like, I can't even keep up with all his social media now. I thought I was really good. I got like 10 accounts. I can't even keep up with it. Like start with, like that's something that your school could do to differentiate itself. The second would be start with a personal branding class. Like if you have an entrepreneur class in your school or an intro to business class, create a chapter in there that you can teach personal branding. Doesn't mean that you're doing NIL in your school, but you're teaching kids and their parents. You're either doing a workshop in the classroom or you're hosting a night, you know, in the evenings or whatever, a workshop like this, right, where you can teach and train them. And the third thing that I would tell you is do a personal finance class. You know, anything over $600, you have to disclose that on the NIL front. Okay, our Uncle Sam is going to get his. But that could apply even if you don't get NIL deals and you're just going to college and you've just got your typical check that you've got to pay your rent. I mean, how many times I've been there, we've probably all heard war stories of kid spends his check that's supposed to go to rent or supposed to go to food, and then he comes to the coaches or comes to the athletic director because he didn't know how to manage his money, okay?
Or the IRS.
Or, yeah, well, that's the worst case. I'm just talking about just week to week. Again, forget NIL, just their scholarship, you know, it'll come in a check sometimes, depending on how their bills are paid for and things like that, right? You know, they could blow that in one weekend and not have any money for the rest of the month or the rest of the semester or whatever it is. So those three things on the educational front for you coaches and for you parents, those are three things that you can be doing right now without breaking any rule. Those are like, you empower your parents, you are empowering your kids, and you're empowering your coaches, because those are three things they're not gonna change. Those three things will not change in this space at all. And they're gonna help you both with recruiting, and they're gonna both help you with NIL. And maybe the last thing would be, you know, I get asked all the time, Bryan, what would you tell a college student or what would you tell a high school student right now coming out? Like, what are the characteristics of, you know, getting a job or, you know, doing what you do or whatnot? Become a great communicator. Learn how to write. Kids are great with like memes and emojis right now. Like, okay, communicate with an adult. Learn how to write a clear sentence. Learn how to, you know, get on camera, record yourself. Learn how to talk in front of a camera. You know, if I was going to pick 4 things to kind of train on, those are things that coaches can be doing right now. Now, again, you need to probably bring in some experts to do that. Those are things that you can do. There are some of that curriculum that Randy's talking about. I have curriculum like that. There's ways to do this where you don't have to invest a ton of your time or energy, but there are things that you can be doing. So just want to touch on that.
Piggybacking on
Yep.
that, I have no skin in the game on this one, but a financial literacy course, it's called Money Vehicle. There's 2 that are approved nationally. I can't remember the name of the other one, but 30+ states now require financial literacy in high school, right? And Money Vehicle is being used across many, many states now on a statewide basis as one of those approved courses. So You don't need to do it as part of the curriculum, you can do it on the side as well. A good friend of mine played pro football for 9 years. He's out really to help kids, right, to learn how to manage their money. He works with the NFLPA, he works with several college athletic departments, and then he's got a full curriculum. It can be, you know, kind of a part-time thing, or it can be a full semester course that you can adopt as a school or adopt just for your kids and things like that. Money Vehicle, Jed Collins is the author.
Okay, we're gonna, again, try to touch on both topics here, and we'll go another probably 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to some questions. Hopefully you're gathering some questions now in your minds. Let's come back to recruiting here just a little bit. Tom, I know I had alluded to it earlier. You obviously are interfacing with presidents and athletic directors. The pending House settlement, one of the things that is part of that, the potential is the roster caps or potential roster reductions. You know, I think if you read between the lines, that means that we could see some sports potentially cut. We could see some teams moving from a full sponsored Division I sport to maybe a club sport. What, if you were reading the tea leaves, what are your peers saying in the industry around the roster piece of it?
Well, I think at any level, there's great concern, because like a lot of things in college athletics, it's going to be different. We don't like different. You know, we like the way it's always been. You know, the way we all remember it as former athletes and are watching sports all of our lives. You know, I think another thing to think about though, and I'll say just for Division I right now, and Haneen, correct me if I'm wrong here, there are still minimum standards for sports sponsorship that aren't going away as of today. Thus, when we talk about some of these sports going away, well, not yet. And so, you know, right now, today, you know, it could change tomorrow, because it changes every day. Maybe not tomorrow, but, you know, there are still opportunities, you know, in the NCAA, and really in all three divisions, as well as the other organizations, JUCO and NAIA, that are still there. But there's concern. I think another thing for schools that maybe I've worked with, not day to day, but in the Power Four, is how do you publicly talk about what your plans are? And I saw this with cost of attendance a few years ago, where, you know, we weren't going to do cost of attendance. We can't afford cost of attendance. Guess what? We're all doing cost of attendance now. It really, you know, maybe, I don't know at the Division II level, but, you know, any mid-small college, non-football college in Division I is probably doing cost of attendance. What they're saying, or what they're having to say now, because they don't want to get labeled as, well, they're not going to be doing this, they're not going to be big time, they're not going to be, you know, a true Division I school. But every school has to claim, at least, big or small, we're going to do this, and you're starting to see a little bit of that. I saw some FCS football school out west that absolutely, we're in the house agreement, we're going to revenue share. I've seen a HBCU, which aren't historically, in the sense of financially well off, talk about how they're going to opt in to house. I don't know how they're going to do it. I know a little bit of the revenue opportunities at those schools. They're going to have to get rid of something. Right now, it's not sports. That, you know, we assume that going forward, but there's going to be some other expenses that have to go away. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think what you're going to see. I think most people that follow the space, and this has really been happening. They just haven't called it this. I think you're going to start to see sports at a certain school get tiered at a certain level of funding, and so they're going to have to make some decisions. And so, you know, because it's a really good kind of, even though they're 15 minutes away, Oklahoma softball is going to be, that'll be a tier 1 sport at Oklahoma. At most programs, softball will not be a tier 1 sport, right? It just won't be. It doesn't make the money. It's not profitable. It happens to be in Norman. that is a very unique situation. So they will fund it at a really elite level, but candidly, they already are, you know, if you compare, you know, what they're doing compared to other people. So I think you're gonna see sports like that, which, you know, if you play golf or you're, you know, on the track and field, like men's track and field, sorry, that's gonna be hard. You know, they're not gonna tier it at a level, but candidly, they haven't been tiered it that way anyways, right? So, I think it's a relative factor, but you're gonna see that the budgets are gonna be allocated. If you've seen some of the numbers that are out there, they're already doing that today. They're kind of planning for that, as it is, but some of that tiering isn't just on the, revenue sharing. Some of that has to do with the amount of scholarship or the amount of roster spots that they make available in certain sports. Just because you have a roster of, let's say, 40 on a, you know, on a track and field squad, it doesn't mean that they're gonna keep 40. That just means that's the top end. They might just carry 20 guys, and that may mean what they work with. So there'll be some really tough decisions, but again, I don't think that really is any different than what it is now. They're just the pies changed, and this would be the easiest.
So those are good questions to ask, right?
Yeah.
At your recruiting visit or as you're being recruited, like those are intelligent questions to ask. How are you funding my sport? What are your plans long-term for my sport? Are we gonna, is there a chance it will be declassified? Is there a chance it will become a club sport, right? And those are great questions to ask because you're making a commitment. When we talk about the NLI, right, the National Letter of Intent, that's the school's guarantee that you're gonna go. The financial aid package is your guarantee what you're gonna get paid, right? It doesn't commit to any sort of future, right? These are all one-year deals, right? Now, I don't know what's gonna happen, you know, we just saw it at Wisconsin, right? When the kids signed a 2-year NIL deal and they transferred and they're not releasing him and things like that. So that's part of the wild, wild west part of it. But the point is that those are really intelligent questions for you guys to ask because you need to be looked not just at your coach, because he or she may not even know. You gotta go to the administration and say, what are your plans for my sport?
Yeah, I'll give you a real scenario just on the recruiting front. So again, met with a family this weekend talking about recruiting. Son's gonna be a small NAI Division II, Division III kind of prospect. It's great. Said, been on a couple of game day visits and been to a couple places. This school's gonna, in Division II, if you don't know, they have 36 full scholarships in football. And so they went to one program, and that program said it publicly, we have 27 full scholarships. Okay, that's what they're working with. That's just on the football side. That doesn't include the academic side. Same equation could apply to basketball or golf or any other sport, right? It's just this one kid. They went to another school and they said, well, we're gonna max our 36 and we're gonna raise NIL dollars through a collective even in Division II. And so we're gonna try to, you know, raise the equivalent of like 60 or 70 scholarships through fundraising we're gonna do with the collective. Okay, big boy, like that's a lot of money you're gonna try to raise to go do that. We'll see if they're successful. I would be when I heard that, I'm highly skeptical of that because it's a lot of money to be raised when they have a hard enough time raising to that point now. Same thing applies in the high school, you know, so so great questions as you go through the recruiting process. Again, what level are they funded, just in the pure like sport administration side of it, and then you can ask the NIL question. That's definitely a great question to ask.
I think even to your point, piggybacking, if you don't have anybody to ask, you can get a pretty good visual of where a conference or where that institution is gonna put their money at. Perfect example, your Big East doesn't have football, so they're gonna put a lot of money into their basketball schools and their hockey programs versus they're probably gonna put more money. UConn's gonna probably pay their athletes more than Baylor basketball because we have football that we have to equate for too in our rev share. So it's also looking to see where you're strong, where each conference is strong at, and then you're also that school. Look at the other programs, even if it's not yours, because it'll tell you a lot. Like perfect example, OU is gonna fund softball pretty well because it makes quite a lot of revenue, but they might not fund women's basketball as good as Iowa is gonna fund women's basketball, right? So even look kind of broader of like, okay, well, I play tennis, maybe in my conference, who's funding tennis very well, because everybody's gonna put priorities on different, and then look at the overall conference too. Like your biggies, without having football, I mean, they're, again, all their other programs are gonna be pretty well funded.
And the same logic applies down market when we talk a lot about the big schools. Same thing applies in the small college. Again, I was using like small college examples. There are some schools at the Division II level that they basically work off, and it's kind of like, it's like sales, like buying a car. They work off a margin criteria, meaning just because you have a 4.0 and a 28 ACT, and you're a really good women's basketball player, they will only stack the two aid, the aid from basketball and the aid from academics. They'll only stack it to a certain amount. Some schools will. Not every, so don't run off and say, oh my gosh, they're not stacking, but some schools don't, and that just has to do with they're trying to remain profitable. They're trying to stay in business because they know if maybe they don't have as big an endowment or something like that. So, all right, let's use the remaining like 15 minutes to kind of talk about the differences between college NIL and high school NIL, and because we talked about it, and then what we would, let's start there. I think I put a few things up on the table, or on the list of items on the table that I had on the screen there. What would you tell, because we've got a few coaches in the room. Randy, I'm gonna start with you here, and then Gary, I may come to you just from a brand perspective. What would you tell coaches right now? They can't touch it directly, but education is certainly a really important thing for high school coaches, and they're committed to that. What would you tell high school coaches they should be doing around the high school NIL and educating their parents, their student athletes, their peer coaches, their administration? What guidance would you give them? And whatever you say, I'll either disagree or agree with you.
Right, disagree. No, you and I are of like mind, I think, on most things. I think all the things we've been talking about and you covered, right, I think those are all right on, right? You wanna be educated. First and foremost, you wanna do things that are in the best interest of the kids, right? And you wanna be aware of that. We are the official NIL partner for the Louisiana High School Athletic Association. So every NIL deal that comes in, every question that comes in gets reverted back to me. And I can't tell you how
That's
hard.
me here in Oklahoma.
Yeah. And I can't tell you how heartbreaking it's been to get some of the documents in. And I'll give you just one example. I won't use any names, but really high level, first round kind of a draft choice baseball player in Louisiana. Louisiana's got great baseball, right? So the executive director sends me an agreement, says this is the agreement for this one kid who's a really good baseball player, and the coach wanted me to look at it. And it was from a national agent, one of the top agencies in the country for pro football, basketball, baseball, etc., CAA. And I'm reading it, and I said, okay, I'm redlining it as we go, and I'm like, man, this is awful. I called him up, I said, this is, number one, it's not in the best interest of the kid. It's not in the best interest of the family. It's certainly violating every LHSAA bylaw that we've talked about. He goes, well, would you call the family? I said, sure. So I called the dad, give me the number, I called the dad up, and it takes like 2 weeks to get a hold of him, and we finally talk, and I said, listen, I'm just gonna give you my advice if this was my child, right? And I walked him through all the things that were wrong with it, right? Number one, if he signed any sort of a deal, the agency was gonna have the rights to that, to any revenue from that. If he signed a deal with Nike, for example, the agency was gonna have the rights to that in perpetuity, regardless, after high school, after college, after, forever. So there's a bunch of things like that. And at the end I said, listen, I have attorneys on staff. If you'd like for us to help you with that, negotiate this, or just give you some advice, we're happy to do that. He goes, okay, no, I'm really glad we talked, okay, thanks. I said, do you wanna follow up? No, I think we got it, thank you. And clearly, he had already signed the deal. Right? Wasn't in the kid's best interest, you know, it was in his best interest, in his perspective, from his perspective. He and the kid eventually break up, the kid leaves home, you know, it's all those crazy things that money becomes, you know, the top of it, right? And so I make that point, not that that's gonna happen to any of us here, but as coaches, I think that is our responsibility to protect our kids, right? And there are a lot of agents now that are popping up in high school, in and around high school. And the one thing I would encourage you to do is to get educated, because, and when we were talking with people in Texas about it, and one of the coaches was pushing back on it, and my business partner said, well, you know, let me ask you a question, coach. Let's say one of your student athletes comes and asks you about NIL. What are you gonna tell him? I'm gonna tell him I don't know anything about it. Says, okay, do you think he's gonna go home and say, well, coach doesn't know anything about it, I don't care, we won't do anything? No. He's gonna go find somebody else. He's gonna find a family friend. He's gonna find an agent, right, who calls him up or whatever it might be. And all of a sudden, this agent or this other third party has his ear around NIL. And it may be just like that thing that deal that I just talked about. So I would encourage you, number one, to get educated. Number two, to put your kids first, right? Most of us as coaches are scared to death. I work literally with, I think we have 14 or 15 states that we work with. And we go in there and we talk to the coaches and things like that, and then the last thing they want to talk about is NIL, right? Because it's different, right? Nobody wants NIL. We started an NIL business, education business, because for all the right reasons, which I talked about earlier, and we can't keep the doors open just on NIL. We've started doing consulting work and things like that, which has been great, and we do really well with it. But it's because none of the coaches really want NIL, but it's here. It's here in high school, it's 40 states. It's here in college. Every college athletic department or kid can do NIL. So if we're gonna serve our kids, we better get educated about it. And we better learn about it and also put them first. And not that they're doing what I want them to do, but they're doing the things that are gonna help them to become better people, right? And that's what I talked about. I'm gonna take a little shameless plug here right now. Whether it's the college or the high school market, the NIL clubs are by far and away, from my perspective, the purest way to do NIL. And everybody can do it. Every school can do it, every kid can do it, every team can do it, everybody can do it. And again, it goes back to what you guys have all been saying. If you work at it, you're gonna make some money on it. If you don't, you won't. But there's over 350,000 college student athletes on the NIL club platform at their respective schools. I'm sure you guys probably have 15 of your teams. A place like Creighton has 8 teams that are on it. And it's pure swarms. If you're not the Livy Dunns or the Bronny James, where I've got 3 million followers and people, and Nike's gonna pay me $1 million to repost stuff and things like that. So it's the purest form, because I get a bunch of my buddies, we put a group together, we put a company together, a group, right? We sign up, then we create content, we find a market for the content, that market pays us to get access to the content. I share it with all my buddies. What's the matter with that? So we've got 350,000 college student athletes that are active on the NIL club platform. Over 200,000 high school student athletes are active on the NIL club platforms today. Over 1,000 in Oklahoma, and high schoolers are already on the NIL club platform. So to me, that is the absolute best way to get get entrenched into NIL and learn about it. You have to post content in order to share in the revenue. You have to post content. and you have to send an email or a social media post or a text to somebody asking them to be a part of it, right? And fans, friends, boosters, kids, whoever, you know, family, they pay a minimum of $5 per month to get access to this closed network. So it's not Twitter, it's not Instagram, it's not Facebook, it's a very closed environment, so only the people who are interested in receiving it get access to it. And you learn how to communicate, you learn how to post, you learn how to create value for somebody. You do all those things that we're talking about here. So to me, it's the purest form, and it's something that every high school and college student athlete can participate in and win at NIL.
And that is a good example of what the market would call a marketplace. So there are now thousands of marketplaces. Some you might be familiar with, and you don't even think of them that way. Like, how many of you have heard of Cameo? You use Cameo. Like, I sent my wife, like, a comedian did a, you know, deal for her, right? That's a good example of a marketplace. That's much more prominent, right? But you know, that comedian signed up, and he gets a royalty, and then the marketplace takes a fee. Well, now there are thousands of those now that student athletes can opt into. Your athletes, if you're a high school coach, they're in marketplaces now. You don't even know they're in marketplaces, as an example. So there's literally thousands of those that exist today. I wouldn't be on every one of them. That'd be calculated, and it does require work. So we're gonna ask one more question here to Gary, and then we're gonna open it up, because I think Q&A is the best way to do this. Gary, you've had to teach a lot of the 7 kids that you've, like, what to do, how to do it, you know, what's the deliverable, you know, how did you go about kind of coaching? Because you kind of were at the grassroots level, like, they didn't have education, you were the educator. So what'd you do? How'd you start?
I stumbled through all of it in the beginning, because the hardest part for me was I was used to working with adults before I transitioned to working with high school athletes. And so you assume in the beginning that they understand, even it's written down on paper, of course they've got it, they'll do it, no problem. Then a couple of months go by and, hey guys, where's the post? What post? Did you read the deliverable? Oh yeah. At least once a week post, did you see that? Okay, yeah, I got you. And it just, you literally have to baby them. I mean, it's hand holding in the beginning. It's like, okay, I need you to post. You know, take your pick, Instagram, X, those are the 2 you like to do, just anything. You could say, I had a great workout today, thanks, that's it. It takes you a minute. And they finally got into a rhythm with it. It took a little while, but then once you get them trained, once you got them trained, then if they're good at what they do, then they do it.
Yep. And so so you don't have to give me the amounts or anything, but like a typical deal with one of your kids, what's that look like? How often, how much, like, what's the engagement look like?
Oh, it's easy. All I ask is 1 post a week. That's it. And we even compromise, because they were telling me about their schedule, just repost. That's literally a couple of seconds, poof, done.
Yep.
And that's their deliverable for each week.
And are you paying them in cash or trade or both?
Trade.
Okay.
But we started cash for a few. We offered a commission-based deal, and if they're willing to put in the work and they help out with the sale, now they do get commissions.
Okay. So Coach was talking about the bat. There's one of the first deals we saw in Oklahoma a couple of years ago was with a bat and glove company, and they sponsored a girl at Piedmont, and that's basically, she gets trade, which technically is considered NIL, and even more technically, you get enough trade, you have to disclose that as well to the IRS, right? So like, trade is part of it, right, when we think through disclosures. And we haven't talked a lot about that. That's one of the big differences between college and high school is disclosures. And I would tell for the high school staffs that are in here, even the parents, 2 things around that. One is keep a paper trail. You know, if you're a high school administrator, I know you got a million things you're trying to keep track of, but if you have kids that are starting to do prominent stuff in that, just to protect yourself, I would just ask them, like, set up a Google Smart Sheet or something. Like, we're working on, like, more of a sophisticated manner that maybe we'll do done at the state level, but at minimum, try to keep some level of record. And as a parent, same thing. Two things there, keep track of what you're doing, and but before that, the most important thing is, don't sign an agreement unless you have somebody else look at it. It's probably one of the biggest mistakes. Randy kind of gave a war story. You know, in the state of Oklahoma, you can send them to me, you can just email and I'll look at them. I'm not an attorney, but I did stay at Holiday Inn last night, so I've looked at a lot of these, and I can tell you what works and what doesn't work. Don't be afraid to negotiate a little bit. Like if an agent's wanting 20%, which they will, they'll come out of the gate with that, and they're gonna wanna adjudicate in Delaware. Okay, those terms are great for them, they're not great for you, so let's figure it out.
Totally out of line.
Yeah, so there's ways to negotiate. We had a top basketball player in the state of Oklahoma that was a Big 12 high-level basketball kid. I mean, if you're getting recruited to play basketball in the Big 12, you are high-level basketball player. And saw 2 agent agreements, both of them 20% cut, adjudicate in Delaware. It was both agent groups out of New York, and you know, same kind of thing. It was like, hey, I can't tell you what to do, but if they were my kid, this is what I would do. And you know, I'm not sure exactly what happened on the back end of that, but I didn't get a big warm fuzzy. It was kind of like, well, we've already made a decision. It's like, but you're leaving a lot on the table. So we'll leave it at that. But I would just say for all the parents, both in recruiting and with NIL, ask a lot of questions. What you're doing tonight is a great step, and so I applaud you guys for that. So we're gonna jump to some Q&A. So this is where audience participation. If you don't ask questions, this gets really boring and awkward. We just look at each other. But I would just challenge you guys to ask questions to the panel. It doesn't matter. Just throw a jump ball. Anybody want to jump in? Any questions?
So Gary, are you sending like 1099s to these athletes? How does that work on the tax side of things, or?
If they make 600 and over, but no, not for last year, because we just started in December. So we made an amendment to their original NIL agreement, and so nobody started until this month, so.
I would tell you that most of the reputable marketplaces, like Open Doors, like the NIL clubs, they do handle all of that information. And when you get involved with a marketplace like that, you wanna make sure they do that. Now, the NCAA is also going to require, and they've already selected a partner to do all the transaction tracking and things like that to make sure. I don't know what NAIA and NJCAA are gonna do, but the NCAA has already selected a partner to do all that tracking.
And we did the same thing with a different Base Path is who we did ours. But all of our student athletes got 1099 through Base Path, which is just another provider of financial services.
I think it's not out of the realm of possibilities that there'll be a statewide disclosure strategy here sooner rather than later. I'll leave it at that.
But
that'll
you
be
can be sure.
that'll be my tease for tonight.
But you can be sure, for anybody who participates in the NIL clubs, they get, everything's managed,
It's pretty
funds
common.
are distributed, and 1099s.
But it's a good question, because marketplaces are a little different. They're kind of set up, that's automated, and you know, all that kind of stuff. But you know, a lot of kids may get one with the local, you know, here in Mustang, so you know, if there's a real estate rep or you know, a local real estate or whatever, right? There are other entities, right? That's part of the homework that I would be asking those is like, okay, have a schedule of payments, have a schedule of deliverables, have a schedule of, you know, tax, you know, all that kind of stuff. Those would be all the prep work that you would wanna do.
Yeah, it's all gonna be in the contract.
Yeah, you'd wanna have all that written on the front end. I see a lot of, you know, it's like, oh, well, he's a buddy or whatever. We're not, you know, it's kinda like doing business with people at church. Have it written down, just document everything. It's better, it'll protect you, it protects them, all that kind of stuff, so. But that's a great question. Thanks for starting us off. It's a good one. Yes, sir.
Just for being realistic with our kids, and you saw the percentages for scholarships and stuff, and now you're talking about the transfer portal that was never around when we were going there. Is it more realistic to be with our kids? I mean, you got somebody who's 6'6" and a half, he's gonna stand out as a D1.
Yep.
But no more regular kids, should they be looking more at going the D2, JUCO route?
Yeah.
And then maybe through the portal, is that more of what you're gonna see high school kids doing now? Than what we did back then?
So the first one is, I always tell There's a couple, you asked a couple questions inside of one question here. Let me try to dissect that a little bit. So, the first thing is, I tell every parent, be realistic. 99% of them are not playing Division I. It's just not. I mean, the math just does not math, okay? I mean, it just doesn't. So, you know, so that's the first thing, is absolutely be realistic. Number two is, this is where the relationship with your high school coaches is really important, because your high school coaches have coached players that have played at all those different levels and can give you a comparison, right? So they can say, well, you know, you're Billy, but when Johnny was here, he was the same measurables, he was the same 2 or 3 year starter, or whatever it is, right? To be able to tell you. And so your high school coaches are a real big believer in their role in recruiting is so valuable. Or your club coach, if you play more golf or tennis or, swimming or baseball or anything like that, those coaches should be able to give you a pretty good guidance. And so as you go into the off season, this is a good question, or a good, all your coaches are gonna have an exit interview or a postseason, sit down with the kid. And that's a good opportunity for your son or daughter to be able to share their goals and what they want to do. And that high school coach is going to say, you need to get this, you need to get bigger, you need to get faster, you need to get stronger, your grades are sucky, or whatever it is, right? And if you want to get to here, these are the things that you've got to do to get there. Your high school coaches play a huge role in helping that. And so don't minimize that. But there's a time when that conversation is appropriate. There's also some times where it's completely not appropriate, right? You're, week 7 of the football season, it's not appropriate to go ask that question. But if it's in the off season and you're training and you're in summer pride, you can have that quality time. I'm picking on football here a little bit, but you guys get the ideas. Those are some appropriate times. But I think being realistic is hugely important, and most people rank a slot or 2 above what they really are. Just in life, we're all we're humans. We all kind of rank ourselves a little better than we are. I think I'm better looking than I really am. It's just the way that it really works. But I think your high school coaches and your club coaches can play a big role in helping kind of set direction on where to focus in on, and then attack that. So what do I mean by that? So if you are if we think that you're going to be a small college golfer, or you're going to be a small college basketball or volleyball or football or whatever, then maybe go to the Oklahoma State camp and get the T-shirt and the selfie with Mike Gundy. But do that once, and then spend the rest of your time focus on NSU and Central Arkansas and some other places, right? Or Southwestern or East Central, or focus on places where you can potentially get recruited. That would be my guidance, but I could spend 10 hours on that topic.
If I could, the flip side to this conversation, right, to your point. But when we were all getting recruited, right, it's like, I'm gonna go to Division I and that's where I'm gonna play, right? Or I'm gonna go to Division II, and that's not the case anymore, right? Where you go is not limiting you anymore.
Right.
So if a kid go someplace where you can play, where you can compete, where you can have fun, where you can become the best that you can be. And it's probably better to go a little bit lower than higher at this point, because you can always go up. I mean, I deal with college coaches all the time, as does Bryan, and as does everybody here, right? They're constantly, the portal, you're turning over, some schools are turning over 25% of the roster each year. And they're not coming down. They're either coming sideways or they're coming up. Mm-hmm. Right? So that I would encourage you as kids, right? Hey, you've got potential, you're not quite there yet. Go someplace where you can play, get experience, things like that. You got a kid who played at Creighton last year, played at South Dakota, from Aurora, Nebraska. Went to only Division I offer, South Dakota State. Player of the year in the Summit Conference. Came to Creighton, was all Big East for 2 years, get drafted in the first round by the Boston Celtics. So, there's a lot of maneuverability here, right? And if you continue to grow, you evolve, you get stronger, you reach your, full potential, so that's one side of it. The other side of it is about 50% of the kids who go into the portal don't get picked up. So as their coach and friend of the family and things like that. That's the other thing, because you're gonna get those calls, coach, I wanna go in the portal, what do you think? You just gotta be aware of that, right? That a lot of kids have a great situation, and they go into the portal, and they're stuck, and they can't go back, and there's no place for them to go.
I have a kid right now that I worked with him and his family for years. Went to Utah, was on a full scholarship at Utah. Played a year and a half there. Got hurt, had a shoulder surgery. If he's playing at Utah, he's probably, if he stays, he's probably playing. Transferred, came home, left his scholarship, walking on at Oklahoma, probably never plays. And you're talking a legit 4'4", 6'1" kid, and those don't grow on trees, and he's just sitting because he made a stupid decision, candidly. Like, he left a really good spot with all of his school getting paid for, and he just, he had a couple bad days. So, the guidance would be go somewhere and have production first. That's the biggest thing, go somewhere. But, I think the old school still works, which is find a school where you can make a lasting impression for the next 40 or 50 years. Again, if I showed you the crazy text message with my college teammates from 25 years ago, I cherish that. If I would have gone to 3 different schools, I wouldn't have had that now. And so I do think that there's value on it, but it's difficult right now. And we have unregulated free agency right now happening in, certainly in college, probably to a lesser degree college if we're being, or high school if we're being honest with ourselves. But yeah, so I think those are just the principles of what's important to you as a parent. If you're a parent that every year you go on to a different travel baseball team because you're just not happy, well, then you're not gonna be happy to get in college either. But if you're one of those that are pretty loyal and steadfast, I've probably had 2 or 3 parents in the last 3 weeks that have called me and said, we're thinking about going to a different high school for his senior year. Why? Well, we like that coach. We think there's a better opportunity. Okay, so when the college coaches come by, that new coach doesn't know his work ethic or her work ethic. He doesn't know anything about her. He knows a little bit because you're coming to his place, but he can't vouch for you. And then the old school that you were at, they can't vouch for you either now because you left their program. So when you get on the transfer train in high school, then it becomes a transfer train in college, then I would, little hypothesis as a man of faith, I think it affects other things. How many of you are married in this room? There's a few married people in here? Okay. Have any of you had a tough patch with your spouse?
Every day.
My
fault though, my fault.
Yeah. She's texting me right now, where are you at?
I'm watching Mexico for the last
13 years or 13 days?
Days.
Okay. But my point, how long have you been married to your wife?
Almost 40.
Okay, so through that, this is what I always tell the parents and the student athletes is, it's worth it though. 40 years, that's special. Especially now, that's darn special to put up with your butt. I can tell, right? Okay, and so if you think about that, because I have a lot of parents like, we're gonna do this, then we're gonna do this, and we're gonna transfer, we're gonna do this. Okay, but you're setting that seed of doubt and it's distrust that affects your marriage, and that's like a philosophical. We could go on a big old tangent on this, but I really believe that we need to tell our kids about commitment, because you guys as coaches, you're talking to them about commitment every day. Training table, eating and food and all the things that you want them to do in the weight room and all that stuff. We have to teach them that same thing. That's our job as parents. So the transferring, there are some really cool stories. There's the Baker Mayfield 1 in a million story. There's a whole bunch of bad. There's much more bad from my perspective.
One of the coaches I was talking to today, head of the Coaches Association in Texas, which is the largest sports organization in the world, right? 28,000 coaches are members there of 40,000 that are there. And what we were talking about was that today, we're using the example of the NFL, but But it really, I think it's universal in that regard. The importance of team is coming back, right? The culture, the loyalty to your teammates, and less regard to me. You know, you listen to Patrick Mahomes talk. He didn't talk about him. He talks about his team, his teammates, the culture, how we won, all those types of things that has nothing to do with him talking about it. When you start transferring for your own benefit, where you start doing things for your own benefit, I'm not saying you should never do it, clearly, but I think, to Bryan's point, we all have to consider the bigger picture, and there's a lot to be said for loyalty, for leadership, for culture, for rising your teammates up, for being a good person. And to me, and to Bryan's point about, you know, all of the people that he has on his thread, right? That's awesome. That's awesome. I had 3 teammates die this year, guys I played with in college. And one kid I recruited, 4 guys died this year, and that hurts because there was a very special relationship there.
Yeah.
And if you get into the transferring in high school, you get into the transfer portal, you bounce around 2 or 3 different times, you know, what kind of a foundation for life are we setting for our kids and for ourselves?
I saw a kid, you guys didn't know?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you for running. We're getting ready to wrap up. Any other questions for the group?
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.
Great.
See you in a couple weeks.
Thanks for your time.
Yep, no problem.
Is it true that you can be in junior college now and that doesn't count towards your eligibility?
Well, it's a TBD on that. That is, nobody has the answer to that right now.
What time is it?
The answer is no.
The answer is no. The answer is no to that.
So if they use their COVID year, no. So I can't tell you how many student athletes got screwed because of that, which again, that's far above the institution's head. That's what happened at the federal level. Again, keep up with what's happening, ask questions. Hindsight 2020, you know, depending on what institution that kid was at, it's the institution's fault. They should have asked more, which again, that's where some of the Wild Wild West terms come from, because the guidance that came out said, oh, well, if you play JUCO, you get your JUCO year back. Well, if you played COVID, you didn't. So you had student athletes pull out of draft, you had student athletes pull out of transfer portal, you had vice versa, you had student athletes that went in the transfer portal and couldn't get their spots back. Which to that point, your connections and your relationships can help in that situation. But again, ask questions and understand what's going on, because to the public, it appeared that everybody got their JUCO years back, and in reality, so many kids actually didn't.
So what about for a high school student going forward? I mean, I think that's what.
No,
that's
it'll
happening.
be, you get, I think what you'll see most likely will be, I'll be surprised if they don't pass the 5 years of eligibility. I think that's coming. I think most everybody knows. So that's good, you get 5 instead of 4. And then,
So just no red shirt?
correct.
And
Yeah.
JUCO will count towards that 5.
But you get
to play it.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
But you get to play it.
But that impacts, just like it did during COVID, a high school recruiting,
Yeah, just stacks it.
stacks it up, right?
One more
Delays
stack.
it, whatever you wanna call it.
If they pass that JUCO rule, which you talked about, that I've also seen and heard, is that really affects the high school kid anymore as far as going D1 because of the junior college not losing any eligibility.
Yeah, that was a really specific corner case, that, Diego Pavia, I mean, like, you had to graduate, played at a certain time, like, it's certain parameters. A lot of people made the misconception it's like all of junior college. That is not the case. And it was if you go back, you have to be go back and read the legalese of that. It's really specific criteria that fall into that. So there's a few kids that fell into that, but not very many. Like 1 to 2% fall into that really narrow category.
Yet, billable hours are still undefeated.
Yes.
We don't know what's around the corner later.
But yeah, so I would look at junior college the way that we've always looked at it, which is it's a 2-year opportunity. And then, you can go on. I think what'll happen now is you'll have 2 in junior college, probably 3 in, NCAA or NAI after that. On that, I mean, I typically tell people if you're getting recruited at the schools that are recruiting you the first time around, so if you're getting recruited at Division I level and maybe academically you can't make it, and you go to junior college, they're probably gonna re-recruit you, most likely in 3 semesters. If you're getting recruited by Division II now and you go to junior college, unless you hit some massive growth spurt or change your body significantly, you're probably getting re-recruited. So in that case, like, why wouldn't you just go to the 4 or 5 year school right out of the gate and just develop with them? But to each his own. Some people look at it a little different. If you're not a very good, I have this kid right now that's gonna go to NEO, and his situation specifically, but he needed to go to a place academically, he could get a little bit more further into his academic. Some kids will go for development reasons, or maybe that's the best opportunity. There's lots of different reasons, so every situation is a little different.
That being said, if you don't like it, just go raise a lawsuit and you'll win.
Yeah.
That's the other alternative. I had a kid who got told no by the NCAA, went and raised a lawsuit and got his ear back. So with that being said, they're gonna rework the eligibility rules. I mean, it's not, that's why we say the space is so shaky, cause you can just go sue them and
So,
win.
to your point, I have a really good relationship with the SEC, right? The guy who does compliance for the SEC, I had him talk to some of our guys. And what he told me was, said, Randy, the Big Four conferences, right? We've spent the last 10 months rewriting the NCAA rule book, which took over 100 years to develop. So that's to the point, everything's changing, because it's being rewritten as we speak. And there's so many things that are impacting that rewrite that are legal in nature and not mandated by the NCAA presidents, right, which is what it used to be. Now it's being mandated by legislation and by legal interpretations of those laws. So that's why it's continuing to evolve, and it's a long and winding road.
Do you think that foreshadows the breakaway model, or the?
No.
Okay.
No. That's a separate issue.
No, but I don't.
That's tomorrow night.
That's not their expectation, nor is it their desire.
Okay.
I'm not saying they don't want more control.
Right.
They don't want to break away, because there's a lot of benefits to being a part of the larger organization. But they want, like they have for football, where they control all of, the college football playoff and all of those types of things. They want to expand that into basketball for obvious reasons as well.
I think a compromise to that, rather than a full breakaway, is I think you'll see the introduction of private equity into college sports that hasn't been there. So I think
Well, it's
you'll see that.
interesting.
I was on with a guy that is running multiple $100 million private equity company this week, and he's like, I'm really interested in buying 51% of one of those Power 4 school programs. So like, very real conversations are happening. So I do think that that's more likely than a full breakaway.
Yeah, I would say, so I talked about your Mark the other day, who's the Big 12, the commissioner of the Big 12. And they went all out looking at private equity and how would that impact them. And private equity wants to invest in something and then turn it over in 7 or 8 years and get a profit, right? They want to reduce expenses and increase revenue, increase value, and then turn it over. And he said, that model doesn't work for us. However, private funding and private investment does. And I think that's what you'll start to see. You're gonna see a lot of private monies enter into college athletics.
Some of that has to do with some of the Title IX stuff and some of the rev share stuff, because once they become privatized, then they can do whatever they want to do with the public money. So that's what we're kind of alluding to. That's a more reasonable path forward than like a fee rate. So we could go into a big rabbit hole on that.
That's Wednesday night.
Yes. Okay, a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. Any other questions?
Are big donors gonna get tired of giving all this money to these players and
Yes.
leave after a year?
Yes.
Is there what's gonna fix that, or is that just how it is?
I've gotten that conversation a lot, to be honest, and I've been around a lot of donors who are so committed to this space that will never, regardless whether we ask for it or if the collective asks for it or whoever, who've committed to NIL for as long as it's around. I think what you're gonna start to see is athletic departments get a little bit smarter about how we do business. Athletics has a expense problem, not a revenue problem. So I think what you're gonna start seeing is athletic departments be a little bit more cautious about how much they're spending and allocating. Like, maybe it doesn't make sense for Texas to go put all those Lamborghinis out on their recruiting visits, right? Which that's a whole separate thing. But you're gonna see schools get a little bit more smarter about how they manage their budgets, because now they have $20 million to make up. As far as the donors, I mean, they get tax benefits, there's things that the donors get on the back end, priority points, ranking systems, some just want it cause, hey, or they're gonna build a new stadium, I want first dibs on my first name being on that stadium, so it's a little bit more tricky than the donors getting burnt out, because some are doing it for other reasons, and now that this is moving institutionally, they can get all of those benefits. I think where some of the fatigue was coming from was them donating to collectives, which they weren't able to receive their benefits, but that all changed the past few months to where they could.
Or being asked, so colleges are also getting much smarter on the asks. So, you know, Bryan, do you wanna make a gift to the collective, or do you wanna make a gift to the baseball stadium project? So, you know, you probably don't have enough money to do both. I know. So, so I think they're getting a little smarter about that. That's actually, I've heard that a lot in Oklahoma. They took them a while to understand, cause they were just double dipping everybody. It's like, okay.
Well, I think to your point, is at the very beginning, nobody knew, like, and truthfully, none of us thought this was staying around. So, yes, a lot of us went to our donors initially asking for facilities, asking for the traditional things that they're used to being asked, and then we are like, oh crap, this is staying. Okay, go back, ask them for another 1 million after we just asked for 1 million. So that's where you got some of the donor fatigue a little bit, is we just had made asks for things, and then we came back and made other asks, and without their benefits. So at least when they donate to a facility, you know, they have a naming right, they have, you know, if they can attend special private events. There's things that they were able to get through that, versus on the collective side, most of them weren't getting that. So again, it's shifted, but from my seat, none of the donors we've talked to moving forward, I think they want more clarification on where their money is going to, and just knowing like, hey, perfect example, our men's basketball team is normally pretty good, they're not having a good year this year, so where's my $1 million going when the team's crap? So they want a little bit of clarification, which again, we've shifted how we've asked them for money. They're not donating to these student athletes themselves, they're donating to the competitiveness of Baylor basketball, not to player 1, 2, 3. So we've shifted how we've asked, but.
So percentage wise, I'm sorry, I'm asking my question.
Yeah.
Are players getting the money from the NIL deal or from a collective, like what percentage?
Currently, right now, they're still getting, so you've got a mixture of both. You have some student athletes who have collective money, and then they have brand deals and partnerships. The brand deals and partnerships, unless certain collectives dabble in that, most of them don't. So those are all facilitated by an agent, if they have an institution that helps them out, or their own, if they're really good at it. That's how they get the brand deals and the sponsorships. The collectives are separate entities away from the institutions. Normally there's different setups, there's a board, there's a panel of people, there's staff members who kind of decide, player X, we fundraise, we've got this money for you, and they deal with all of that. Some institutions are tied to their collective, they work together. I've been lucky, I've been in 2 institutions that do. Not everybody works with their collectives and are very much kept away from the athletic department. So collectives are a third party, they'll always be a third party. Now, because of the House settlement, some collectives are gonna go away because the institution's gonna come in and pay for what we're calling IP. So they're gonna sign a group licensing agreement with their student athletes for X amount, in which that would give us a right to have their picture on a roster, to have their bios, to have their name somewhere. Basically, I'm not gonna bore you with the details, but they're signing a deal with the institution moving forward to where we will pay them, which prior to the House settlement, we couldn't do. So that's why you have collectives.
Let me give you a fact. So in college, because it differs, it's completely opposite from high school. In college, 90% of the revenue, it comes through a collective, 10%, say brand deals with real NIL. In high school, it's all brand deals with very minimal exceptions, because there's not very many collectives. And the one thing I would just say, and then we'll wrap up, is on that, there's a lot of diligence around tightening up the role of collectives, both, you know, the college ones that exist today, but the high school one, the IRS has sent multiple letters out on ensuring that those are not just money laundering. A lot of people wanna just throw money into a coffer and pay a kid to do nothing. Can't do that. Can't do that in college, and you can't do it in high school. And so be very, very careful of any of that behavior. So,
One last thing, sorry. One of the things you can consider, right, one of the things we've done, we've started a foundation, which is a 501c3, the lawyer who put it together for us, Bryan introduced me to. And what we'll do is we'll have people donate money, and that money money can then go to other 501c3s who can hire student athletes to come do community service-based activities. So I'm working on a couple of deals, with colleges right now for that. It certainly works for, it was really set up for high schools, but we're doing it for colleges. But if that was ever anything people here were interested in, we certainly have the capacity to do it, and that's a great way. I was talking to one of the girl athletes, the women's athletes at Creighton University, goes, we need to be doing more of these things. We want to get more involved in community service-based things, and especially if we can be funded then to do it through NIL, it's a great way to do it.
All right, well, I hope you guys learned a little bit tonight. We could keep going. There's a lot to this that we didn't even scratch the surface. I want to thank Tom and Randy, Haneen, and Gary. It was Gary's idea, so you guys can all blame Gary for I'll give one shout out, like, got a bunch of kids, if you want an NIL deal, you ready to put in the work in, you might want to shake a hand before you leave with somebody down at the end of this table. He's looking for really smart people who are active on social media that want to sell. Sweat is free. So check out his stuff in the back. If you're a parent or you want to talk to me, come up. I'm happy to talk to you as well, or any of the panelists will stay around. I've got cards back there. I've got info if you want to grab info and learn about what we do. You can grab all of the stuff that I have online. And if you don't follow me on social media, I can get you cards. All that stuff is in the back. But I appreciate you coming tonight. Filled up a room. Appreciate all. Tom came in from Frisco. Gary, Randy from Omaha, Nebraska. Haneen drove up from Waco, and Gary came across the street. So, appreciate all you guys. Thanks so much for being here.